I was curled up on the couch, half distracted by some mindless TV, when Mark leaned against the doorway with this oddly pleasant smile. Out of nowhere, he said, "You should go out with your friends more. Have fun. Relax. Don't worry about me." For a second, I almost laughed. Mark? Encouraging me to have a social life? That wasn't his style. Usually, if I mentioned dinner plans, he'd sigh, maybe even pout a little. But this time, he sounded so generous. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe he was finally softening after all these years. Maybe he'd realized I deserved a little joy outside our four walls. Honestly, the thought made me smile. I told myself not to overthink it, that maybe our marriage had turned a corner. It felt refreshing, almost flattering, to hear him put my happiness above his own for once. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a new, better version of him. But then he said it again, and again. Each time the same easy tone, almost too smooth, like a line he'd practiced in his head. He kept nudging me. Call your friends, set a date, don't worry about me. The more he said it, the less natural it felt. There was something just slightly off, something I couldn't put my finger on. Why was he pushing so hard for me to go? At first, I tried to ignore the little knot forming in my stomach. Maybe I was just being suspicious, I told myself. After all, wasn't this what women wanted? A husband who encouraged them to enjoy life? To have fun with friends? Still, it felt strange. Mark wasn't the type to hand out freedom so easily. He had always liked keeping me close, knowing where I was and what I was doing. This sudden change of tune almost felt like whiplash. The more I replayed his words in my head, the less innocent they seemed. Go on, Claire. Enjoy yourself. He'd say it with that half smile, his eyes darting just a little too quickly back to the phone in his hand. I started noticing the timing, too. He only ever suggested it on certain nights, right when he knew I didn't have plans. It was as if he was trying to script my life, pushing me out just so he could… What? Sit in silence? Watch the game? Something didn't add up. I began to watch him more closely, to measure the pauses between his words and the little flicker of relief on his face whenever I said yes. It was subtle, but it was there. That small exhale, like he'd just cleared a hurdle. It made my skin prickle in ways I didn't want to admit. Because deep down, I felt it. This wasn't about me needing more fun. It was about him needing me gone. One night, as I slipped my shoes on by the door, he practically hurried me along, pressing the keys into my hand with that too bright grin. "Go enjoy yourself, Claire. Don't wait up for me," he said, like he couldn't get me out fast enough. That was the moment the knot in my stomach tightened. I remember pausing, fingers frozen around the doorknob, thinking, since when does my husband want me gone so badly? I drove away that evening, but my mind didn't follow the road. It lingered back at the house, replaying his tone, his insistence. The warmth I had once mistaken for kindness now felt like a performance, one rehearsed so carefully I almost believed it. Almost. Every word of encouragement seemed heavier now, weighed down with a truth he wasn't saying out loud. And once you feel that kind of shift, you can't unfeel it. By the time I returned home, the living room looked exactly the same, the TV humming, his shoes kicked off by the couch. But I couldn't shake the sense that something had moved, something invisible but real. That was when I started to wonder, if he wanted me out of the house so badly, what exactly was happening while I was gone? It started with the smallest things, the kind of details you almost talk yourself out of noticing. One night, I caught a faint trace of perfume in our bedroom. Not mine, not any scent I'd ever worn. It clung to the air like an unwelcome guest, sweet and heavy, impossible to ignore. I stood there, frozen, the hanger still in my hand, wondering if maybe I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew better. Then came the wine glass. Just one, sitting in the sink, smudged with lipstick I didn't own. Mark had been in the kitchen before me, humming like he had nothing to hide. My chest tightened as I rinsed it out, pretending not to notice. But the silence between us in those moments felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. I couldn't look at him without seeing questions stacked up behind his eyes. And the dog, my sweet, loyal dog, started barking near the front door on nights I came home earlier than expected. Not the playful bark, but sharp, urgent, the kind that says, "Someone's here." Except when I walked in, the house was spotless, quiet, like nothing had happened at all. My heart would pound as I looked around, every shadow suddenly suspicious. Each little clue whispered the same truth I didn't want to face. He didn't want me gone for me. He wanted me gone for him. I started watching him the way you watch a stranger you don't quite trust. Every little movement felt like a clue. The quick way he'd shut his phone when I walked into the room, the sudden energy he had when he thought I'd be leaving for the night. It was like living with two versions of Mark, the husband who smiled and kissed my cheek, and the man who practically pushed me out the door with that false warmth. Inside, I wrestled with myself. Was I being paranoid? Was I inventing ghosts out of thin air? But then I'd catch another whiff of perfume, or notice the faintest trace of wine still lingering in the air, and the questions came roaring back. If I asked him directly, he'd laugh it off, tell me I was imagining things. And maybe I wanted to believe him, but my gut wouldn't let me. Nights became heavier, filled with silence that pressed against my skin. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word he'd said, every door he'd nudged me through. The pieces didn't just fit, they screamed. Something was happening in my home while I was gone. And once that seed of suspicion takes root, it grows fast, twisting through every corner of your mind until you can't think of anything else. One afternoon, after pacing circles in my head for days, I decided I couldn't just sit and wonder anymore. If Mark wanted me out of the house so badly, then I needed to know what happened while I was gone. My hands shook as I ordered a small hidden camera online, something discreet, easy to tuck into the living room without him ever noticing. The thought alone made my stomach churn, but so did the idea of living blind to the truth. When it arrived, I waited for the perfect moment, Mark distracted in the garage, the dog curled at my feet, the hum of the dishwasher covering any sound I made. I slipped the camera into its spot, angling it toward the front door and the couch. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and determination. It felt like crossing a line I could never step back from, but I knew I had to. That night, as he once again encouraged me to go out and enjoy myself, I smiled, kissed his cheek, and pretended to leave. But for the first time, I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I was walking away with a plan, and I had no idea just how much that little camera was about to change everything. That evening, I did what I always did, grabbed my purse, slipped on my jacket, and let the door close behind me. But instead of driving across town to meet my friends, I circled the block and parked a few streets away. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Sitting there in the dark, engine off, I felt like a stranger in my own life. A woman spying on her own marriage, desperate for answers she already feared. The hours dragged on like years. I stared at my phone, fingers trembling as I opened the app that connected to the hidden camera. At first it showed nothing, just our quiet living room, the glow of a lamp, the shadow of the dog pacing. I almost convinced myself I was wrong, that I'd gone too far. But then I saw him. Mark, opening the door with a grin so wide it made my stomach twist. And she was there. A woman I'd never seen, walking in with a bottle of wine like she belonged. The way he leaned in to kiss her, tender, practiced, intimate, told me everything I needed to know. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. In that moment, it wasn't just betrayal. It was confirmation. All the little pieces I'd been collecting fell into place with a single brutal click. I couldn't breathe. Watching them move through my home, our home, was like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. They laughed, poured wine into glasses I had washed with my own hands, settled onto the couch where I had sat only hours earlier. Every brush of his hand against her skin felt like a knife, cutting deeper than I thought possible. I pressed the phone to my chest, as if hiding it could somehow shield me from what I was seeing. Tears burned my eyes, but anger rose hotter, sharper. I wanted to burst through the door, to scream, to shatter the lie right there and then. But something inside me stopped. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was survival. But I knew one thing. If I confronted him now, it would end in shouting, excuses, and his twisted version of the truth. He'd find a way to turn it back on me, to make me question myself all over again. So I didn't move. I let the fire settle in my chest, shaping itself into something steadier. I wiped my face, straightened my shoulders, and stared at that screen until every second burned into my memory. If he thought he could betray me in silence, then he didn't know me at all. I wasn't just his wife. I was about to become his reckoning. When the video ended, I sat in my car staring at the black screen, my hands still trembling. The night outside was silent, but inside me, a storm was raging. I thought of every meal I'd cooked, every birthday candle I'd lit, every promise he'd made while looking me in the eyes. All of it shattered in the span of minutes. The weight of betrayal pressed on my chest, heavy, suffocating, but under it pulsed something else. Resolve. I drove home later than usual, careful to make it look like nothing was wrong. Mark was already asleep, his arms stretched across the bed like he owned the space. I slid in quietly beside him, staring at the ceiling while he breathed, blissfully unaware that I knew. The silence between us that night wasn't emptiness anymore. It was power. Mine. Because I had seen enough to end our marriage right then and there. But I didn't want an ending whispered in private, tucked away behind closed doors. No. He had chosen our home as the stage for his betrayal, and I would use that same stage to expose him. I lay awake, eyes open, planning, and with every passing minute, the shape of my revenge grew sharper. A week later, I slipped into character as easily as if I'd rehearsed it. Over breakfast, I smiled at Mark and told him I was heading out with the girls again that evening. He barely looked up from his coffee before grinning, that same guilty spark in his eyes. "That's great, Claire. Have fun," he said, almost too quickly. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice light, my expression calm, as if I hadn't already mapped out every step of what was about to unfold. What he didn't know was that I'd been making a very different set of plans. Instead of calling my friends, I reached out to his family, his parents, his siblings, people who still believed in the image of Mark, the faithful husband, the steady man. I invited them over for a surprise dinner. "It'll be casual," I promised, keeping my tone breezy. "Just us, just family." They agreed without hesitation, touched by what they thought was a thoughtful gesture. That night, I set the table with care, every plate gleaming, every glass polished. My hands shook not from nerves but from anticipation. I imagined Mark walking through that door, arm around the woman he thought he could hide forever, only to find his entire world staring back at him. The same house he had turned into a place of betrayal was about to become the stage for his downfall. The clock ticked louder than usual that evening, each second stretching out like a drumbeat. His family arrived one by one, their faces glowing with curiosity. "What's the occasion?" his mother asked, handing me a bottle of wine. I smiled, steady as ever, and said, "You'll see." The room filled with small talk and laughter, but beneath it, I felt the weight of what was about to happen. Every chair around that table was a witness waiting to be seated. I poured drinks, passed plates, and played the gracious hostess, though my mind was locked on the front door. The dog sat near my feet, ears twitching every time the sound of a car passed. My pulse quickened at each noise, each pair of headlights flashing across the window. I could almost feel the walls of the house leaning in, ready to hold the moment inside them forever. And then, the sound I had been waiting for, the scrape of the key in the lock, the creak of the door swinging open. My heart stopped, and the room fell quiet. Mark stepped inside, his hand linked with hers, both of them grinning, expecting dim lights and romance. Instead, they froze. His family turned in unison, silence wrapping around the table like a noose. It was the kind of silence you don't come back from. Mark's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a man caught mid-lie. The woman at his side stumbled back, clutching her purse as if it could shield her from the stares. His mother's hand went to her chest. His father's jaw tightened, and his siblings looked back and forth in disbelief. The air was thick with betrayal, a silence louder than any scream. And that was when I moved. I stood, calm, deliberate, and picked up the remote. With one click, the TV flickered to life, the hidden camera footage playing for everyone to see. Gasps filled the room as Mark's own actions replayed in front of his family. Every kiss, every laugh, every shameless touch. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat back down, and let the evidence speak louder than any words ever could. Finally, I met his eyes. "You wanted me out of the house so badly," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the stunned silence. I lifted my glass slowly, holding it just high enough. Tonight, I stayed in, and brought company. The weight of my words hung in the air, sealing the moment. Mark stood frozen in the wreckage of his own lies, while I held all the power. The moment shattered like glass. His mistress bolted first, clutching her purse and muttering apologies no one cared to hear. She slipped past his stunned family and disappeared into the night. Mark stammered, reaching for words that didn't exist, while his parents sat frozen, their eyes wide with shame. The man they thought they knew stood exposed in his own living room, stripped of every excuse. And me? I'd never felt more steady in my life. He tried to reach for me then, his voice shaking. "Claire, wait. It's not—" But I didn't flinch. I set my glass down, folded the napkin neatly beside my plate, and turned to his family instead. "This," I said softly, "is what's been happening while I was out." Their silence was answer enough. The disappointment etched into their faces burned deeper than any anger I could have unleashed. It was the kind of judgment that leaves no room for escape. Mark's father finally spoke, his voice gravelly with rage. "How could you?" His mother wiped her eyes, unable to look at him. And in that moment, Mark wasn't a husband, wasn't even a son. He was just a man caught in the wreckage of his own lies. I didn't scream, I didn't argue. I simply stood, collected my things, and walked out of the house that would no longer be his kingdom. The very next morning, I met with my lawyer. No hesitation, no second guessing. I wanted everything in writing, official and permanent. Divorce papers were filed before Mark even had a chance to crawl out from under the shame. To my surprise, his own family stood behind me, offering words of support, even promising to testify if needed. It was as if they, too, were reclaiming something stolen by his deceit. Calls from him poured in, one after another, buzzing through my phone like a desperate swarm. I didn't answer a single one. I didn't owe him my time, my explanations, or my tears anymore. He had taken enough from me, and now his words had no power. Each ignored call was its own small victory, a reminder that silence can be the loudest rejection of all. I stayed in the house, the place that had once felt poisoned by his lies. The settlement made it mine, every room reclaimed, every corner washed clean of his shadow. At night, I slept with the windows open, letting fresh air sweep through, breathing freedom into walls that had once witnessed betrayal. For the first time in years, the space belonged entirely to me. Not us, just me. Weeks later, my living room looked nothing like the battlefield it had once been. The table that had held his downfall now held bowls of snacks, glasses clinking, and the sound of laughter spilling into every corner. My friends filled the space with stories and music, the kind of easy joy that doesn't need to hide behind lies. The dog curled happily by my feet, finally at peace, as if he too knew the storm had passed. I watched them, my chosen family, and felt something I hadn't in a long time: freedom. No second guessing, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just me, surrounded by women who lifted me up, the kind of laughter that heals wounds no one can see. I raised my glass, not to toast what I'd lost, but what I'd found again: myself. And as the night carried on, I thought of Mark's words, the ones he'd repeated so often. You should go out more. He was right, in a way. I did go out. Not to bars, not to girls' nights he never cared about. I went out of his life and I never looked back. Out. Forever.